Her screaming got everyone's attention, and in a blink of an eye, her roommates were standing next to her in her bedroom. So what had happened? And they all started screaming, one rushing to the bathroom, so she wasn't sick all over the floor. They hadn't been expecting to find what they did. They called the police, and while they waited, they all wondered how that had ended up in her suitcase and if she was the one responsible. Laura Selwyn was a Temple University student who was in her third year of biology studies. She had shared a flat with Alice and Chloe for long enough that they called themselves best friends after 2 years. They had all met in their first year of college and had gotten along swimmingly. Throughout their time knowing one another, they shared many happy and sad memories. And they were close-knit, but there was more. They told one another everything, no matter what it was. They never kept anything to themselves and were always ready to help, support, and give advice when it was needed. Laura, Alice, and Chloe were confident in how strong their bond had become and considered one another as more than friends. They had become sisters. But something would put those beliefs to the test. Laura had just returned from a vacation she took to Eastern Europe and was ready to unpack her bags. But when she saw what was inside, she couldn't help but scream, and her friends were no exception. They were quick to call the police. Since then, Chloe and Alice have wondered what Laura had up her sleeves. They thought they had found an answer after they saw what the suitcase had been holding. During the last year, Chloe and Alice had grown suspicious of their friend. Their friend had started behaving differently, and they couldn't put their finger on why. She wasn't home as often as she used to be, sometimes leaving at strange night hours. As she would avoid answering specific calls inside the flat so she wasn't overheard. But that was just the beginning. Laura suddenly had a surplus of pocket money which she used to buy gifts for her friends and expensive clothes. Sometimes she even offered to cover their portions of the house bill. Chloe and Alice were beyond confused because they never knew Laura had any income source. And they knew she had spent her first year working as a part-time waitress, but she barely had enough to cover the bills. Her parents often had to help her financially, so they couldn't help wondering where she had gotten all the money. Alice eventually decided she wanted to ask Laura for answers. She replied that she was left money in her aunt's will after she had passed away. Alice shared the news with Chloe, and they wondered why their best friend hadn't told them about it before. They soon forgot about it, but their suspicions rose again a few weeks later. Laura left the flat to answer another one of her strange calls. Chloe and Alice had had enough and agreed to question their friend about it. And they asked her who had called and why she seemed to be hiding something from them. "Is it a new boyfriend?" they joked. But her reply only brought more questions to their minds. Laura told them her aunt had called. "I went outside because I was struggling to hear, but she wanted gift ideas for my mom's birthday," she said. They thought her answer sounded robotic, like she had planned what she would say. And they also thought it was odd for her to bring up her aunt again. Did her mom have more than one sister? Alice and Chloe knew she was keeping something from them, and they were determined to find out what it was. The friends had been planning to go to Florida for spring break, but Laura broke the news that she wouldn't be joining them. The three had started the ritual when they first started college, so to say Alice and Chloe were surprised was an understatement. When they asked her why she told them she would go to Croatia in Eastern Europe by herself, but her friends didn't know what to say considering Laura had never been to Europe, what was waiting for her there, and why the sudden change in plans. But that was how it was done. Alice and Chloe said Laura goodbye at the airport and then went to Florida with other friends. For their whole time there, they couldn't help but keep wondering what Laura would be up to. Although they stayed in touch here and there during spring break. Laura sent them some pictures of the hotel and the towns she was visiting. Still, her two friends couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. Finally, the three girls returned to their shared flat. Chloe and Alice got there first, while Laura arrived later that night. She refused to be picked up by any of her flatmates, despite them offering to do so. Again, Alice and Chloe found this strange. But soon enough, Laura was there. She hugged her three friends and promised to tell them all about her experience in Croatia right after unpacking her baggage. Then she ran to her room with her bags. A few minutes later, Chloe and Alice heard her screaming in horror. Quickly, the two girls jumped off the couch and ran to Laura's room. The scene they found when they opened Laura's door was absolutely appalling. Laura was screaming in a corner of the room, staring at an open suitcase on the bed. All around it, dozens of scorpions ran up and down the bed and the room's floor. What were they even doing in Laura's suitcase? Immediately, the three girls left the room, closed the door behind them, and called the police. They told the operator about what was going on, and 2 officers and some pest control specialists were sent on their way. Until they got there, the 3 girls remained in the living room, in shocked and frightened silence. How could that happen? Why was Laura carrying scorpions in her baggage? All the girls could do now was sit and wait for them to arrive. The police told them they weren't allowed to leave their flat until they had dealt with the situation. They had no idea if they were in trouble. When it comes to going through customs, it sometimes complicates things when the authorities don't know what your intentions are. After an hour, the officers arrived along with pest control. They knocked on the girls' door and came in. The girls were instructed to sit down on the couch while they figured things out. There were 2 officers and 1 man from pest control. The girls sat helplessly. They were now getting scared of something other than the scorpions. The girls soon realized that they had a potential problem. It seemed that the police were taking the matter very seriously. So they had no idea what would happen next and started to feel more anxious about their presence than the scorpions. So when they found the scorpions, they thought that would be the worst part of their day. They had no idea how wrong they were. Laura, Chloe, and Alice watched as the man from pest control quickly and expertly caught the scorpions. He then had a quick word with one of the officers before leaving the apartment. The girls all breathed sighs of relief. No matter what else happened, at least the scorpions were no longer terrorizing them. Now that the scorpions had been dealt with, the officers wanted to move on to bigger things. He asked the girls whose bag it was. Laura reluctantly raised her hand. The officer sat down across from her and got out a notebook. "Miss, depending on how you answer my questions, things could be very serious. Try to answer as honestly as you can." Laura felt a pit forming in her stomach. The officer had just made her feel a lot more nervous than before. She looked over at Chloe and Alice. They were by her side, at least. They always helped each other out of plenty of jams and stuck through everything together, but would they be able to help her this time? The officer made it very clear to Laura that she could face some serious charges if they found out that she brought the scorpions on purpose. Of course, Laura and her friends knew that the scorpions got in her bag on their own, but would the police believe that? Smuggling animals is a serious problem in most countries. Animals and insects that aren't native to a place can really harm the ecosystem. But what could Laura face? There are lots of factors to find an exotic animal smuggled through customs. These factors can be criminal intent and the impact the animals would have on the local ecosystem, to even what state the animal or animals are in. Laura was ready to give the honest truth about the situation and hoped it would be enough, but she had no idea what officer she was dealing with. So Laura had to explain herself to the officer. She told him that she had gone to Croatia during her spring break. She had explored a bit of Europe and seen lots of attractions. She even had her plane ticket and photos to prove it. But would that be enough? The explanation that she was just an innocent teen trying to have fun on holiday would make or break this. After the officer heard her explanation, he asked, "And your 2 friends? Did they come with you?" The 2 girls looked at each other and remembered how fishy Laura had sounded before. Would they be able to defend their friend? They had no idea what she was actually doing since they had their suspicions earlier. Even though Alice and Chloe weren't with Laura when she went to Europe, they explained that they believed their friend. Even though they weren't sure about her aunt's story, they knew she would never willingly smuggle anything into the U.S. They told the officer that she was a good judge of character. He appreciated their testimonies, but he had more questions for Laura. "Roberto, where did the scorpions come from?" Laura thought about that question for a moment before answering as truthfully as she could. "I'm not entirely sure. I visited a lot of trails and nature parks while I was abroad, yet it's possible that they crawled into my bag while I was there. I also spent some time in a hostel. They could have gotten in there." Laura had given the most truthful answer she could, but would that be enough for the officer? The officer shifted his weight on the couch. Laura knew full well that if he wanted to, he had the power to cuff her and take her down to a police station, but she didn't want it to come to that. The officer then surprised her with a question that she couldn't have expected. "Miss, you like exotic animals, don't you?" Laura couldn't believe it. "Of course I do. I study biology, but that means I also know that they shouldn't be introduced into another ecosystem." So the officer put his notebook away and told the girls that he was finished asking questions, and now he had to use the evidence he had gathered to make a decision. What was the consequence? The decision would be final. He got up from his seat and told Laura that the scorpions would be either isolated from the local population or taken back to Croatia. But then it was a matter of what would happen to her. He told her that he believed her and that she wouldn't face any charges. Relief washed over Laura. "At first we thought she was involved in some sort of racket smuggling exotic animals. She's studying biology, she's always been interested in animals and all that," Alice admitted to the press when interviewed about the story. "But the authorities told us that it's not the first time that this has happened, people unknowingly having scorpions or other animals in her luggage, with people coming from countries like Croatia." They just get into people's bags sometimes and lay eggs there. Still, it was really scary.